Ava Reynolds was 38 years old when her husband of 11 years poured black ink from a $12,000 ceremonial fountain pen down the front of her white Valentino dress at the Four Seasons in Manhattan. And the 300 international executives watching had no idea they were witnessing the beginning of the most expensive mistake of his career. She stood there, ink spreading across Italian silk like spilled blood, while her husband Ethan, dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit worth $15,000, laughed along with the room. Men in Patek Philippe watches and women in Cartier diamonds, all gathered for the signing of a $15 billion international merger deal. The contract on the table represented the culmination of Ethan's 15-year climb from associate to managing director. His signature bonus for closing this deal? $8.3 million, plus stock options worth another $12 million. He'd fought through brutal 90-hour weeks, cutthroat boardroom politics, and stepped on anyone who got in his way, including his wife. God, Ava, you're so clumsy, Ethan said, not even looking at her as he lifted the ceremonial pen to sign the final page. This is the biggest deal of my career, and you can't even stand still without causing a scene. Why don't you go powder your nose? The adults are trying to make history here. The laughter rippled through the crowd. Ava recognized several faces. Board members from Whitmore Capital, investment bankers from Morgan Stanley who'd structured the deal, the CFO of the Japanese conglomerate they were acquiring, 3 senators who'd flown in for the photo opportunity. They'd all watched Ethan accidentally tip the ink onto her dress. They all saw the modest pearl earrings she was wearing, $400 from her mother, not the $40,000 Harry Winston diamonds Ethan had suggested she buy to look the part. They saw the quiet smile of a woman who didn't belong in this world of private islands and 9-figure bonuses. What none of them knew, what Ethan had been too busy performing his way to the top to notice, was that Ava Reynolds wasn't the soft-spoken housewife making occasional charity board appearances that he introduced her as. She was the majority shareholder and controlling owner of Reynolds Global Holdings, the parent company behind the very deal Ethan was signing. The $15 billion acquisition he was celebrating as his crowning achievement belonged to her. Every promotion he'd received, every opportunity he'd been lucky enough to land, every door that had opened for him had been quietly approved by the woman he just humiliated in front of the global financial press. And the contract he was signing with such pride was going to destroy him in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. But Ava wasn't ready to reveal that yet. Not here. Not now. She'd been preparing for this moment for 14 months. Ever since the night she'd come home early from a museum gala and overheard Ethan on the phone with his divorce attorney, mapping out how to leave her the moment this deal closed, scheduled for 6 weeks from tonight. Of course, darling, Ava said quietly, her voice barely audible over the champagne toasts. I'll just wait in the lobby. Don't wait, Ethan said, barely glancing at her as he shook hands with the Japanese CEO. This celebration dinner is going to run very late. Take the car service home. I'll be back whenever. Ava nodded, playing the part perfectly, the part she'd been playing for 7 years while Ethan climbed his ladder and forgot about the woman who'd built the ladder itself. The woman who'd restructured her family's trust to create opportunities for him. The woman who'd sat through dinners where he called her decorative to impress his colleagues. The woman he'd started referring to as my first wife to his younger associates when he thought she wasn't listening. She walked out of the crystal ballroom with ink stains on her dress and humiliation burning in her chest. The exact image Ethan wanted people to see. What he didn't see was the text message Ava sent from her phone as she stepped into the elevator. Activate the representation clause. Reynolds merger approved, pending final review. Execute the Whitmore protocol. The recipient was Margaret Shun, the $1,200 an hour attorney who'd been working on Ava's behalf for the past 12 months, and who happened to be the senior partner at Shun & Associates LLP, the same firm that had structured the merger agreement Ethan had just signed. The representation clause was something Ethan's own legal team had missed in their review of the 1,247-page merger document. It was named after Ava's late grandmother, Dorothy Reynolds, who taught her that the best power in business wasn't loud. It was buried in subsection 8.7d of legally binding contracts. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded corporate justice and devastating power reversals, you're going to love what happens next. This is a story about hidden power, public humiliation, and the price of underestimating a black woman who learned to own quietly. The story of how Ava Reynolds became the invisible majority owner of a $15 billion empire started 23 years earlier, in her mother's study in Philadelphia, with a woman who'd survived being underestimated her entire life and refused to let her daughter make the same mistakes. Ava had been 15 years old when her mother, Dorothy Reynolds, called her into the study of their modest but elegant brownstone and taught her the first rule of generational wealth. Power is safest when hidden, baby. Let them see what serves you. Own what protects you. Dorothy Reynolds had learned that lesson the hard way. She'd been 32 when she inherited $4.7 million from her father, a real estate developer who'd quietly built wealth in Philadelphia's black business district in the 1960s and 70s. Her father had taught her to own properties through LLCs, to invest through trusts, to never attach her name to anything she truly valued. They'll take it if they know you have it, he told her on his deathbed. White folks, black folks who want to prove something, family members who think they deserve a piece. Keep your power quiet, Dorothy. That's how you keep it. And she had. For 30 years, Dorothy had grown that $4.7 million into $87 million through strategic real estate investments, quiet equity stakes in emerging companies, and by being invisible to everyone who mattered in the business world. No magazine covers. No charity galas where she gave speeches. No public boards. Just ownership. Clean, protected, powerful. She'd raised Ava alone after Ava's father, a charming man who'd loved Dorothy's quiet elegance but left when he realized there was real money involved and he'd never control it. Disappeared when Ava was 3. Dorothy never spoke ill of him. She simply adjusted the trust to ensure he'd never have access to a single dollar. Baby, you're going to inherit more than money, Dorothy had told 15-year-old Ava that afternoon. You're going to inherit invisibility. And that's more valuable than any building or stock portfolio. Ava had been an excellent student, quiet, observant, strategic. She'd gone to Spelman College on a full academic scholarship, not because the family needed the money, but because Dorothy insisted she learn to operate in spaces where people didn't know her background. Let them underestimate you, Dorothy had said. Let them think you're just another smart black girl working hard. Watch how people treat you when they think you need something from them. That's when you learn who they really are. After Spelman, Ava had attended Wharton Business School, again on scholarship. She'd graduated top of her class in 2011 with a focus on corporate restructuring and private equity. She'd received offers from Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, Bain, every prestigious firm that recruited at Wharton. She'd turned them all down. Instead, at 24, Ava had joined her mother in restructuring the family holdings into what would become Reynolds Global Holdings. Dorothy was 62 then, ready to pass the torch but determined to do it properly. Together, they'd spent 3 years quietly acquiring controlling stakes in undervalued companies across logistics, manufacturing, and technology infrastructure. They didn't buy sexy startups or chase headlines. They bought boring, profitable businesses that generated consistent cash flow and flew under the radar of major private equity firms. By 2014, when Ava was 27, Reynolds Global Holdings controlled assets worth $2.4 billion. The company was structured through a complex web of trusts and holding companies that made it nearly impossible to trace ownership back to Ava or Dorothy. In public filings, they appeared only as beneficiaries of family trusts, not as controlling shareholders. The company's public face was a white male CEO named Thomas Whitmore, a competent executive they'd hired precisely because he looked the part and was content to follow Ava's strategic direction in exchange for an excellent salary and the prestige of the title. He'll get the credit, Dorothy had said with a knowing smile. Let him. While they're watching him, we'll be building. And build they had. By 2019, when Dorothy passed away peacefully at 69, Reynolds Global Holdings was valued at $8.3 billion. Ava inherited full control at age 32, becoming one of the wealthiest black women in America, a title no one knew she held. She'd met Ethan Reynolds at a charity fundraiser in New York in 2013, 2 years before her mother died. He'd been 34, she'd been 27. He was a rising associate director at Whitmore Capital, charming and ambitious, with the kind of easy confidence that came from private school education and a father who'd been a successful corporate lawyer. Not wealthy enough to be independently rich, but comfortable enough to move through elite circles without intimidation. Ethan had approached her at the bar, assuming she was another young professional attendee. He'd been attracted to her quiet elegance, her intelligence, the way she listened more than she spoke. He'd asked her what she did. "I work in family business consulting," Ava had said, which was technically true. She consulted on her own family's business. They'd dated for 8 months before getting married in a small ceremony in 2014. Ava wore her mother's dress. Ethan's father officiated. It had been simple, intimate, and Ava had genuinely believed she was in love. She'd told him she came from family money, enough to be comfortable, but not enough to change their lives. She'd shown him the modest brownstone she owned in Brooklyn, the safe portfolio she managed. She'd let him believe her trust fund generated maybe $200,000 a year in passive income. Ethan had seemed charmed by her old money discretion, as he'd called it. He'd never pushed for details about her family's holdings. He'd been too focused on his own career trajectory at Whitmore Capital. What Ethan didn't know was that Whitmore Capital, the very firm where he worked so hard to climb the ladder, was 34% owned by Reynolds Global Holdings. Ava had arranged for that acquisition 2 years before they'd even met. She hadn't told him because she wanted to see who he really was. Would he love her for herself? Or would wealth change how he saw her? For the first few years, their marriage had been good. Different, perhaps, Ethan constantly traveling for deals while Ava worked from home managing her empire through encrypted emails and quarterly strategy calls with Thomas Whitmore and her CFO. But good. They'd bought a beautiful townhouse on the Upper East Side for $2.8 million. Ethan drove a BMW 7 Series worth $95,000. Ava kept her old Volvo worth maybe $12,000, claiming she preferred the safety ratings. They talked about having children someday, when Ethan's career stabilized, when he made managing director, when the timing was perfect. The timing never came. The shift had been gradual, so gradual that Ava hadn't noticed it at first. It started with small comments. "You should probably wear something more polished," when she'd dressed for a company dinner. "Maybe you could do something with your hair," when she'd worn it natural instead of straightened. "I just think you'd make a better impression if you seemed more ambitious." Then came the introductions that stung. "This is my wife, Ava. She's not really the corporate type," said with an apologetic smile, as if he was explaining away a deficiency. By 2020, when Ethan made senior vice president and his salary jumped to $840,000 plus bonuses, the comments had become more pointed, more cruel. "You know, Ava, it's actually kind of embarrassing that you don't work," he'd said once over breakfast, not even looking up from his phone. "People ask what you do, and I have to say you're a homemaker. Like we're living in the 1950s. "I work," Ava had said quietly. "I just work from home. Managing your trust fund doesn't count as work, darling. That's just privilege." She let it go. Because she loved him. Because marriages went through rough patches. Because she believed he'd remember who she was beneath the title and the suits. But then came the night that changed everything. December 15th, 2023. A Thursday. Ava had told Ethan she had a late meeting with her financial advisor. She did. A video call with her CFO about a potential acquisition in Germany. The call ended early, around 8:30 p.m. She'd come home to their townhouse, parked her Volvo in the garage, and heard Ethan's voice coming from his home office upstairs. The door was ajar. He was on the phone, pacing, a glass of scotch in his hand. Ava had frozen on the landing, her briefcase still in her hand. "No, David, I'm serious," Ethan was saying. "The moment this Reynolds Global deal closes and my options vest, I'm filing. I've already talked to Patricia at Levinson and Gray. She's one of the best divorce attorneys in Manhattan." Ava's blood had run cold. "Yeah, I know," Ethan continued, laughing. "It's not ideal timing, but honestly, I've outgrown her, David. She's decorative at best. And at worst, she's a liability. You should see how she freezes up at corporate events. Like a deer in headlights. Meanwhile, I'm trying to close billion-dollar deals and network with people who actually matter." A pause. Ava could hear David's muffled response through the phone. "Community property laws," Ethan said dismissively. Yeah, I know. Patricia says because I've been the primary earner throughout the marriage, we can argue that her trust fund income should be separate property. We might have to give her a settlement, but it'll be worth it to be free of her." Another pause. No, she has no idea. She's clueless, actually. Still thinks we're going to have kids someday, settle into domestic bliss. It's almost sad. He laughed again. The funny thing is, she's actually been really useful. Her family connections got me into rooms I wouldn't have accessed otherwise. But I don't need her anymore. I've made my own name now. Ava had stood on that landing for another 15 minutes, listening to her husband describe her like a stepping stone he was ready to discard. When Ethan finally ended the call and came downstairs, she was sitting on the couch, calmly scrolling through her phone. "Oh, you're home early," he'd said, kissing the top of her head absently. "How was your meeting?" "Productive," Ava had said. "Very productive." That night, Ava made 3 decisions. First, she would let Ethan proceed with his plan. She wouldn't reveal her true position, wouldn't fight to save a marriage he'd already destroyed in his heart. She would give him exactly what he wanted, the freedom to divorce the woman he considered a liability. Second, she would ensure the Reynolds global merger went through. Ethan wanted those stock options to vest. Perfect. As the majority owner of Reynolds Global Holdings, Ava would personally approve the deal. She'd make sure every bonus, every stock option, every retention incentive was maximized. Third, she would teach Ethan a lesson about underestimating people, not through dramatics or public scenes. Through the same tools he'd used to climb his corporate ladder, cold, calculated business strategy. She'd called Margaret Chin the next morning. Margaret had been her mother's attorney for 20 years and had helped structure every major holding in the Reynolds empire. She knew everything about Ava's ownership structure, her wealth, her power. "I need you to do 3 things," Ava had said calmly. "And I need them done perfectly." Over the next 14 months, Margaret's firm had worked quietly, methodically, brilliantly. They'd structured the merger agreement between Whitmore Capital and Reynolds Global Holdings with specific clauses that would protect Ava while appearing standard to Whitmore's legal team. They'd prepared divorce documentation that would reveal Ava's true net worth at exactly the right moment. And they'd created an ironclad strategy that would make Ethan's attempt to divorce her the most expensive decision of his life. The representation clause in subsection 8.7d of the merger agreement was particularly elegant. It stated that any Whitmore Capital executive who publicly humiliated a Reynolds Global Holdings stakeholder during official company events would be subject to immediate suspension of equity compensation pending ethics review. The clause was buried in dense language about fiduciary responsibility and stakeholder representation. Whitmore's lawyers had approved it because similar ethics clauses weren't uncommon in major corporate mergers. What made it devastating for Ethan specifically was that the clause defined stakeholder as any individual holding more than 5% equity in Reynolds Global Holdings. Ava held 64%, and public humiliation was defined as any action that caused reputational harm or embarrassment in the presence of media, board members, or other stakeholders. Pouring ink on someone's dress in front of 300 executives and international press definitely qualified. If the clause was triggered, Ethan would lose his $8.3 million signature bonus, his $12 million in stock options, and his $4.7 million retention package over the next 3 years. $25 million gone, because he'd poured ink on his wife's dress. But Margaret hadn't stopped there. She'd also prepared what she called the reveal package, a complete disclosure of Ava's true identity and net worth, time to be delivered during divorce proceedings. Under New York's equitable distribution laws, Ava could theoretically be required to share marital assets acquired during their marriage. But since her Reynolds global ownership predated their marriage, that wealth was separate property. What would be subject to division was the appreciation of her holdings during their 11 years together. Margaret had calculated that if Ethan had stayed married to Ava, respected her, valued her, he would have been entitled to approximately $140 million in marital estate division. But if he proceeded with his plan to divorce while positioning Ava as the lesser earner, claiming she'd contributed nothing of value to their marriage, he would enter those proceedings having just forfeited $25 million in compensation. And when Ava revealed her true net worth, currently $847 million after Reynolds Global's recent valuation, Ethan would realize he could have had $140 million if he'd just treated his wife with basic human respect. The irony would be exquisite. Ava had spent 14 months setting every piece in motion. She'd encouraged Ethan to pursue the managing director promotion. She'd quietly directed Thomas Whitmore to make the merger with Whitmore Capital a priority. She'd sat through dinners where Ethan's colleagues openly pitted him for having such an unambitious wife. She'd smiled through company events where people talked to her like she was decoration, all while knowing that the company he worked for, the merger he was celebrating, the career he was so proud of, all of it existed because she'd allowed it to. And tonight, watching ink spread across her white dress, hearing him call her clumsy in front of senators and CEOs, Ava had felt something cold and final settle in her chest. Not anger, exactly. Something cleaner than that. Clarity. He'd made his choice. Now she'd let him live with the consequences. As Ava rode the elevator down from the Four Seasons ballroom, ink still wet on her Valentino dress, she pulled out her phone and opened the video her security team had captured of the entire incident. There was Ethan, clearly and deliberately tipping the ceremonial pen. His smirk before the ink fell. The way he'd looked away before it even hit her dress, already forming his dismissive comment. It hadn't been an accident. He'd humiliated her on purpose, in front of the entire financial world, because he wanted to remind her, and everyone watching, of her place. Ava forwarded the video to Margaret Chun with a single-word message. Proceed. The car service was waiting for her outside. As Ava slid into the back seat of the black Mercedes, her phone buzzed with Margaret's response. Representation clause activated. Emergency board review scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Final signature authority on merger now requires your personal approval. He just destroyed his own career. Ava looked out the window as Manhattan blurred past. Somewhere above her, in that crystal ballroom, Ethan was accepting congratulations, shaking hands, basking in applause for a deal he thought he'd closed. A deal that couldn't be finalized without the signature of the woman whose dress he'd just ruined. Ava allowed herself a small smile. Tomorrow morning, the world would begin to understand what Ethan was just starting to learn. The quietest person in the room was often the most powerful. And ink stains were nothing compared to the mark of underestimating a black woman who'd learned to own everything while revealing nothing. The morning after the ink incident, Ethan woke up in the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons with a champagne headache and a vague memory of celebration. He rolled over, reaching for Ava out of habit, before remembering he'd sent her home in the car service. The bed beside him was empty, the sheets still crisp and hotel perfect. Good, he thought. She would have ruined the mood anyway. His phone showed 17 missed calls from the office. Odd for a Saturday morning. He checked his email while the hotel coffee brewed. The first message made his stomach drop. From Thomas Whitmore, CEO, Reynolds Global Holdings. Subject, urgent, emergency board review, attendance mandatory. Time, 9 a.m. today. Ethan, your presence is required at an emergency board review this morning at Reynolds Global Holdings headquarters. This concerns the merger agreement signed last night and cannot be postponed. The meeting will be held in conference room A, 47th floor. Do not be late. Thomas Whitmore. Ethan frowned. Emergency board review? The deal had closed. The signatures were done. The press release had already gone out. What could possibly require an emergency review? He called his assistant, Jennifer. Mr. Reynolds, she answered immediately. I've been trying to reach you. Mr. Whitmore's office called 3 times this morning. They said, I got the email. Do you know what this is about? No, sir. But they sounded serious. And they specifically asked if you were aware of subsection 8.7d of the merger agreement. Ethan's mind went blank. Subsection 8.7d? The merger agreement was over 1,000 pages. He'd signed where his lawyers told him to sign. What's in 8.7d? I don't know, sir. But they're sending a car for you at 8:30. They said to come alone. Ethan arrived at Reynolds Global Holdings headquarters at 8:55 a.m., still wearing last night's dress shirt under a borrowed hotel blazer. The building was in Midtown, a sleek 47-story tower he'd passed 1,000 times without really seeing. Strange. He'd been negotiating with Reynolds Global for months and had never actually been to their headquarters. All the meetings had happened at Whitmore Capital's offices or neutral conference rooms. The lobby was all black marble and bronze fixtures. Expensive. Understated. The kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Ethan Reynolds, he told the security guard. I'm here for 47th floor. They're expecting you. The elevator rose in silence. Ethan's reflection stared back at him from the polished brass doors. He looked tired, hungover, unprepared. The elevator doors opened directly into a reception area. A woman in her 50s sat behind a desk, immaculately professional. "Mr. Reynolds. Conference room A is through those doors." "They've already started." "Started? I'm 5 minutes early." "They started at 8 a.m., sir." Ethan's jaw tightened. He pushed through the double doors into conference room A and froze. 12 people sat around a massive mahogany table. He recognized most of them. Board members from Whitmore Capital. Thomas Whitmore, the CFO from the Japanese conglomerate. 3 attorneys he'd never seen before. And at the head of the table, in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than his car, sat Ava, his wife. At the head of the table, in the chairman's seat. "Mr. Reynolds," Thomas Whitmore said, not standing. "Please sit." There was one empty chair. Not at the table. Against the wall, like a spectator's seat. Ethan remained standing. "Thomas, what's going on? Why is my wife?" "Please sit down, Mr. Reynolds," a voice said. Ava's voice. Quiet. Calm. The same voice that had said, "Of course, darling," last night. But different somehow. Colder. Ethan looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time in months. She wasn't wearing the modest, understated clothes she usually wore. This suit was power. Her hair was pulled back severely. No pearls. Instead, a simple platinum necklace that probably cost more than those Harry Winston diamonds he'd suggested. She looked like she belonged in this room. He didn't. "Sit down," Ava repeated, and this time it wasn't a request. Ethan sat in the spectator chair. "Let's begin," Ava said, opening a leather portfolio in front of her. "Mr. Reynolds, are you familiar with subsection 8.7d of the merger agreement you signed last night?" Ethan's mouth was dry. My legal team reviewed the entire agreement." "That's not what I asked. Are you personally familiar with subsection 8.7d? "No." "Let me read it for you." Ava slid on reading glasses. "Any executive of Whitmore Capital who publicly humiliates, demeans, or causes reputational harm to a stakeholder of Reynolds Global Holdings during official company events shall be subject to immediate suspension of all equity compensation, bonuses, and stock options pending an ethics review by the board of directors." Ethan felt sweat forming at his hairline. "I don't understand what this has to." "A stakeholder," Ava continued, "is defined in subsection 2.3a as any individual or entity holding more than 5% equity in Reynolds Global Holdings." She removed her reading glasses and looked directly at him. "I hold 64%. The room tilted. "You?" Ethan couldn't form words. "You what?" "I am the majority shareholder and controlling owner of Reynolds Global Holdings. I have been since I inherited the company from my mother in 2019. Before that, I co-managed it with her starting in 2011. This wasn't possible. Ava didn't own a company. She managed a modest trust fund. She didn't even work. You can't." "Thomas," Ava said, not taking her eyes off Ethan. "Please display Exhibit A." The screen behind her lit up. It was video footage from last night. The signing ceremony. Crystal clear, professionally shot. Ethan watched himself reach for the ceremonial pen. Watched himself deliberately tip it toward Ava. Watched the ink pour down her white dress in slow motion. Watched his own smirk before he'd even looked away. "God, Ava, you're so clumsy." His voice echoed in the silent conference room. The video paused on Ava's face. Ink-stained. Humiliated. While around her, 300 executives laughed. "Public humiliation," Ava said quietly, "of a majority stakeholder. During an official company event. Witnessed by international media, board members, and government officials." She closed the portfolio. "Your $8.3 million signature bonus is hereby suspended. Your $12 million in stock options are frozen. Your $4.7 million retention package is under review. You can't do this." Ethan stood up, his chair scraping against marble. "That was an accident. I didn't know." "You didn't know I own the company you've been working for?" Ava's expression didn't change. "You didn't know that Whitmore Capital, where you've worked for 11 years, is 34% owned by Reynolds Global Holdings? You didn't know that every promotion you've received since 2014 was approved by my CFO?" The room was spinning. "How long?" Ethan whispered. "How long have you been lying to me?" For the first time, something flickered in Ava's eyes. Not anger. Something sadder. I never lied to you, Ethan. I told you I worked in family business consulting. I do. I consult on my family's business. I told you I came from money. I do. You just never asked how much. She stood, and everyone in the room stood with her. Everyone except Ethan, who remained frozen in his spectator chair. This board will reconvene in 72 hours to determine whether your behavior warrants termination or merely suspension, Ava said. Until then, you are on administrative leave. Your office has been cleared. Your access badges are deactivated. You will not contact anyone at Whitmore Capital or Reynolds Global Holdings except through your attorney. Ava, please. The merger you signed last night cannot be finalized without my personal signature, she continued. I am withholding that signature pending the results of this ethics review. The deal you celebrated, the career achievement you were so proud of, is now in jeopardy. Because you poured ink on my dress. She gathered her portfolio and walked toward the door. The entire board followed her. Ethan sat alone in the conference room, in a chair against the wall, while the morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a city he thought he'd conquered. His phone buzzed. A text from his divorce attorney, Patricia. We need to talk. Immediately. Levinson and Gray just received documentation from Chun and Associates. Your wife is worth $847 million. Call me now. Ethan stared at the message until the screen went dark. In the penthouse suite last night, he'd gone to sleep thinking he was the most successful version of himself he'd ever been. This morning, he woke up to discover his entire life had been a performance in a play written by his wife. And he'd just delivered his final line. Ethan sat in Patricia Levinson's office 70 minutes later, his hands shaking as she laid out documents across her mahogany desk. When you hired me 3 months ago, Patricia said, her voice carefully neutral, you told me your wife had a trust fund that generated approximately $200,000 annually. You said she had no meaningful assets. You said you'd been the primary breadwinner throughout your marriage. I thought. You didn't think. You assumed. Patricia slid a document toward him. This is the financial disclosure Chun and Associates filed this morning. Your wife, Ava Reynolds, has a personal net worth of $847 million. She is the sole owner of Reynolds Global Holdings, valued at $15.3 billion. During your 11-year marriage, her personal wealth increased by approximately $312 million. Ethan felt bile rising in his throat. Under New York's equitable distribution laws, Patricia continued, you would normally be entitled to half of the marital assets, the wealth accumulated during your marriage. That would be approximately $156 million. For one brief moment, Ethan felt hope. However, Patricia said, and that hope died. You're currently facing termination from Whitmore Capital for ethics violations. You've lost $25 million in compensation due to the representation clause. And you're on record, in multiple emails and phone conversations I have transcripts of, claiming your wife contributed nothing of value to your marriage. She opened another file. Chun and Associates is arguing that because you've publicly and privately positioned yourself as the sole contributor to marital success, you've waived any claim to equitable distribution of Ava's wealth. They're offering you a settlement of $2.3 million. Take it or leave it. $2 million. Ethan's voice cracked. I could have had $150 million if you'd stayed married to her, if you'd valued her, if you hadn't poured ink on her dress in front of the global financial press. Patricia closed the file. Mr. Reynolds, I'm going to be blunt. You have no leverage here. Your wife owns the company you work for. She has video evidence of you deliberately humiliating her. She has documentation of every contemptuous thing you've ever said about her. And she has the best legal team money can buy. So what do? Patricia looked at him with something like pity. You take the $2.3 million. You sign the non-disclosure agreement. You disappear quietly. Because if you fight this, Chun and Associates will destroy you in court and you'll walk away with nothing. Ethan left Patricia's office in a daze. His phone had been ringing constantly. Journalists wanting comments on the delayed Reynolds merger, colleagues asking if he'd been fired, friends who'd seen the news. He ignored them all and drove to the townhouse on the Upper East Side. His home. Except when he tried his key, it didn't work. The locks had been changed. A note was taped to the door in Ava's handwriting. Your belongings are in storage unit 447 at Manhattan Secure Storage, 10th Avenue. The rental is paid for 3 months. After that, It's your responsibility. The townhouse is in my name. It always has been. Eh? Ethan ripped the note down, crumpling it in his fist. Everything was in her name. Of course it was. She'd bought the townhouse before they were married. He'd just assumed they were co-owners. He'd assumed so many things. The storage unit was a 10 by 10 concrete box containing his clothes, his books, his golf clubs, and his ego. Ethan sat on a cardboard box labeled office items and tried to understand how his life had collapsed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, he'd been a managing director about to close a $15 billion deal. Today, he was unemployed, locked out of his home, facing divorce from a woman worth nearly $1 billion, and looking at a settlement that wouldn't even cover his legal fees. His phone buzzed. His father. Ethan, what the hell is going on? I just got a call from Richard Hart at the club. He said you've been suspended from Whitmore? For humiliating your wife. Dad, it's complicated. Complicated? Jesus, Ethan. I told you when you married that girl to find out about her family's money. I told you to protect yourself. But you said she was just comfortable, nothing major. She lied to me. No, son. You didn't ask. There's a difference. His father sighed. How bad is it? She's worth $847 million. She owns Reynolds Global. She owns 34% of Whitmore Capital. She's been running a corporate empire while I thought she was just managing a small trust fund. Silence on the other end. And you poured ink on her at a public event? It was an accident. Was it? His father's voice went cold. Because Richard sent me the video, Ethan. It's all over the internet. You deliberately humiliated your wife in front of the world. Even if she was worth nothing, that would be unforgivable. But she's worth almost $1 billion, and you didn't even know. Dad, you're my son, and I love you. But you're also an idiot. Fix this if you can. Apologize. Grovel. Do whatever it takes. Because if you lose her, you've lost everything. The line went dead. That evening, Ethan went to the Brooklyn brownstone where he'd first met Ava's mother, Dorothy. The house was dark, clearly empty. A for sale sign stood in the small front yard. He remembered the first time Ava had brought him here, 8 months into their relationship. The house had seemed nice, but modest, a comfortable family home, nothing extravagant. Dorothy had served tea in a simple sitting room and asked him gentle questions about his work, his family, his intentions toward her daughter. He'd liked Dorothy. She'd seemed kind, traditional, the type of mother who raised her daughter to be soft-spoken and supportive. He'd completely missed what she actually was, a woman who'd built an empire and taught her daughter to hide it. Can I help you? Ethan turned to find an elderly black woman standing on the sidewalk, grocery bags in her arms. I used to know the family who lived here, Ethan said. The Reynolds family. The woman's expression shifted, cooling. You're the husband. You know Ava? I was Dorothy's friend for 40 years. I watched Ava grow up. The woman set down her groceries. Dorothy told me once that she was teaching Ava to be invisible. I asked her why. You know what she said? Ethan shook his head. She said, because powerful black women get torn down if people see them coming. Better to own everything and let them think you own nothing. That's how you survive. The woman picked up her groceries. Ava learned that lesson well. I didn't know. No, you didn't. And that was the point. The woman started walking away, then paused. Dorothy also told me something else. She said, I'm teaching Ava to hide her power. And when she finds a man who values her anyway, who loves her when he thinks she's ordinary, that's when she'll know he's real. The woman looked back at Ethan. You failed that test, Mr. Reynolds. And now you know exactly what it cost you. Ethan spent that night in a hotel room that cost $200 he couldn't afford, scrolling through his phone, watching his entire world unravel on social media. The video of him pouring ink on Ava had gone viral. #Inkgate was trending. Business Insider had published an article titled The $25 million Spill, How One Executive Lost Everything by Underestimating His Wife. Someone had leaked that Ava owned Reynolds Global. The comments were brutal. He worked for his wife's company and didn't even know it. Imagine being married to a billionaire and treating her like she's worthless. This is what happens when mediocre men mistake their wives' quiet power for weakness. His professional reputation was destroyed. His personal reputation was worse. And somewhere in Manhattan, in a building he'd never appreciated, his wife was probably working late, running her empire, completely unbothered by the chaos she'd unleashed in his life. Ethan pulled up his contact list and stared at Ava's number. He could call her, apologize, beg for another chance. But what would he even say? His finger hovered over the call button. Then he remembered the way she'd looked at him in that conference room. Not with anger, not with hatred, with nothing. Like he was already gone. He put the phone down. Some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. Some people, once underestimated, would never give you a second chance. And some mistakes cost exactly what they were worth. $25 million. And the woman who'd loved him when he thought she was ordinary. On Monday morning, the emergency board review resumed at Reynolds Global Holdings headquarters. Ethan sat in the same spectator chair, but this time with his attorney beside him, a junior partner from Patricia's firm who looked barely out of law school. Ava arrived precisely at 9 a.m., flanked by Margaret Chin and two other attorneys Ethan didn't recognize. She wore black today. Severe. Final. She didn't look at him once. "Let's begin," Thomas Whitmore said. "This board has convened to determine the appropriate response to Mr. Ethan Reynolds' violation of the representation clause as outlined in subsection 8.7d of the merger agreement between Whitmore Capital and Reynolds Global Holdings." Ethan's attorney cleared his throat. "If I may, the incident in question was clearly accidental. Mr. Reynolds had no intention of—" "We have video evidence," Margaret Chin interrupted, her voice crisp. "Would you like us to play it again?" The screen lit up before anyone could answer. The video from the signing ceremony, but this time with additional angles. Security cameras, media footage, a frame-by-frame breakdown showing Ethan's hand deliberately tilting the pen, his eyes tracking the arc of the ink, his smirk forming before the ink even landed. Accidental. Margaret raised an eyebrow. The video shows clear intent. Ethan's attorney wilted. "My client was under significant stress. The pressure of closing a $15 billion deal, which he didn't close." Ava spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but absolute. "The deal requires my signature, which I have not provided." The room went silent. "The merger is on hold," Ava continued, "pending the outcome of this review. Whitmore Capital's investors are aware. The Japanese conglomerate is aware. The press is aware. Every day this deal remains in signed costs, both companies approximately $3.7 million in opportunity costs and market uncertainty." She looked at Ethan directly for the first time. "All because you poured ink on my dress." Thomas Whitmore opened a folder. "Mr. Reynolds, in addition to the representation clause violation, we've uncovered other concerning behavior." A screen displayed emails. Ethan's emails. "These are communications between you and various colleagues over the past 3 years," Thomas said. "All obtained legally through Whitmore Capital's internal servers." Ethan's stomach dropped as he recognized his own words on the screen. "My wife is nice, but she's not exactly ambitious. She just manages her little trust fund and goes to charity lunches. I honestly don't know what she does all day." Email to David Chun, March 2022. "Ava's fine for now, but she's not really cut out for my world. She freezes up at corporate events. I'll probably need to upgrade eventually." Email to Richard Hart, July 2023. "Having a housewife is honestly kind of embarrassing at my level. Everyone else's wife is a doctor or lawyer or something." Email to Marcus Stone, January 2024. Each email appeared on screen, one after another. A catalog of contempt. A timeline of cruelty. "These communications," Thomas continued, "demonstrate a pattern of disrespect toward a major stakeholder in this company. They create a hostile work environment for Mrs. Reynolds, should she choose to be more active in Reynolds Global Holdings' daily operations." Ava's expression remained neutral, but Ethan saw her hands tighten slightly on her portfolio. She'd read all of them. Every dismissive comment. Every cruel joke. Every time he'd reduced her to nothing in writing. "I didn't know," Ethan said desperately. "I didn't know she was a stakeholder. If I had known. If you had known I was worth $847 million, you would have treated me with basic human respect." Ava's voice was soft. "Dangerous. But because you thought I was just a housewife with a modest trust fund, I deserved contempt? That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is." She opened her own folder. December 15th, 2023. "You were on the phone with your friend David. You said, and I quote, 'She's decorative at best. At worst, she's a liability. I've outgrown her.'" Ethan went pale. January 8th, 2024. "Phone call with your divorce attorney, Patricia Levinson. You said, The moment this Reynolds Global deal closes and my options vest, I'm filing. Patricia says we can argue that my wife contributed nothing of value to our marriage. Ava looked up from her notes. February 22nd, 2024. Email to Marcus Stone. You referred to me as my starter wife. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. She'd been documenting everything, listening to everything, knowing everything. While he'd thought she was clueless, she'd been building a case. Margaret Chin stood. This board must decide. Does Mr. Reynolds' behavior warrant termination for cause, or mere suspension with equity forfeiture? Termination seems harsh, one of the Whitmore board members said carefully. He's been with the company for 11 years. His performance record, Ava interrupted, includes every deal approved because Reynolds Global Holdings owned 34% of Whitmore Capital. His promotions include every advancement I personally signed off on through Thomas. His success includes every door my family's name and money opened for him. She stood, and once again, everyone stood with her. Ethan Reynolds succeeded because I allowed it. And now he will fail because he earned it. Ava, please. Ethan stood, desperate. I know I made mistakes. I know I didn't value you the way I should have. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. Counseling. For the first time, emotion flickered across Ava's face. Not anger. Something worse. Disappointment. You want to fix our marriage now? After you spent 14 months planning to divorce me? After you called me a liability? After you humiliated me in front of the entire world? I didn't know the ink would. You didn't know I'd have power. Ava's voice was steel. That's the only thing you didn't know. You knew exactly what you were doing when you poured that ink. You were reminding me of my place. In front of senators, CEOs, international press. You wanted everyone to see that I was beneath you. She walked toward the door, then paused. This board will vote on your termination in 48 hours. Until then, I suggest you consult with your attorney about the divorce settlement. Because the longer you fight, the less generous it becomes. $2 million? Ethan's voice cracked. That's all you're offering me? After 11 years of marriage. Ava turned back, and her expression was colder than he'd ever seen it. You're right. That's not fair. She looked at Margaret. Reduce the settlement offer to $1.5 million. And add a clause that if Mr. Reynolds speaks publicly about this marriage, the settlement is void. Ava. $1.5 million, she repeated. Going once. Ethan's attorney grabbed his arm. Take it, he hissed. Take it now before it gets worse. Going twice. Fine, Ethan shouted. Fine, I'll take it. Ava nodded to Margaret, who made a note. The papers will be ready tomorrow. Sign them, or the offer expires. Ava opened the conference room door. And Ethan, the next time you underestimate someone because they're quiet, remember this moment. Remember what it cost you. She left. The board followed. Ethan sat in his spectator chair in a conference room that belonged to his wife, in a building he'd never bothered to notice and understood fully for the first time. He'd married a woman who controlled a $15 billion empire. He'd treated her like she was worthless. And now he was learning the exact price of that mistake. $1.5 million in settlement. $25 million in lost compensation. $140 million he could have had if he'd just loved her. 48 hours later, the board convened for the final vote. Ethan wasn't invited this time. The decision about his professional future would happen without him in the room. He sat in a coffee shop across the street from Reynolds Global Holdings, watching the building like it might reveal something. His phone showed a message from his attorney. Board vote happening now. We'll call with results. In the meantime, the divorce papers are ready. My advice, sign them today. The divorce papers sat in Ethan's briefcase and signed. $1.5 million. An NDA that would prevent him from ever speaking about Ava, their marriage, or the circumstances of their divorce. A clause releasing all claims to her wealth, her company, her future. Everything he'd hoped to get from divorcing her. The freedom, the fresh start, the chance to find someone on his level, reduced to $1.5 million and a lifetime of silence. His phone rang. The attorney. It's done, the young lawyer said quietly. Termination for cause. Effective immediately. All equity compensation forfeited. No severance package. Ethan closed his eyes. And the merger? Mrs. Reynolds signed it this morning. The deal is finalized. Your name has been removed from all documentation. Thomas Whitmore is being credited as the lead negotiator. Of course, The deal he'd worked on for 8 months. The career-defining achievement. The $15 billion merger. It would close without him. His name erased like he'd never been involved. There's something else, the attorney continued. Chun and Associates called. The divorce settlement offer expires at 5 p.m. today. If you don't sign by then, they're withdrawing it entirely. Entirely? What would I get? Nothing. New York's equitable distribution laws don't apply cleanly when one spouse has been terminated for cause from a company owned by the other spouse. The courts would likely side with Mrs. Reynolds. You'd spend years in litigation and walk away with legal debt. Ethan looked at his watch. 4:17 p.m. 43 minutes to decide whether to accept $1.5 million or gamble on getting nothing. I'll sign, he said hollowly. At 4:52 p.m., Ethan signed the divorce papers in the attorney's office. His hand shook as he wrote his name on each page. 11 years of marriage reduced to a legal document that took 8 minutes to execute. The settlement will be transferred to your account within 72 hours, the attorney said. And Mr. Reynolds? The NDA is ironclad. If you violate it, I know, I lose everything. Not just the settlement. Chun and Associates included a liquidated damages clause. If you speak publicly about Mrs. Reynolds or the circumstances of your divorce, you'll owe $5 million in penalties. Ethan laughed bitterly. So even in divorce, she has power over me. The attorney didn't respond. That evening, Ethan's phone exploded with messages. The merger announcement had gone public. Press releases from both companies. Quotes from Thomas Whitmore about the strategic benefits. Analysts praising the deal structure. His name appeared nowhere. His phone buzzed. His father. I saw the announcement. Your name isn't on it. I was terminated. Silence. Then for cause. Yes. Jesus, Ethan. Do you understand what that means? No executive position is going to touch you now. Not at that level. I know, Dad. What are you going to do? Ethan looked around his hotel room. The same $200 a night room he'd been living in for a week. I don't know, he admitted. The settlement? How much? $1.5 million. After legal fees, taxes, maybe $900,000. His father was quiet for a long moment. You could have had $140 million. I know. If you just treated her with respect. I know. Ethan shouted, then caught himself. I know, Dad. Believe me, I know. Another pause. Then his father's voice, softer. I'm sorry, son. I really am. The line went dead. Late that night, unable to sleep, Ethan did something he knew he shouldn't do. He drove to the Upper East Side townhouse. His former home. The lights were on in the second-floor study. Ava's study, though he'd never thought of it that way. Now he understood. That's where she'd run a $15 billion empire. While he'd been at Whitmore Capital, climbing a ladder she'd built, she'd been in that room, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and billions of dollars in assets. And he'd never asked what she was working on. Never cared. Never imagined it could be important. The study light went off. A moment later, Ava appeared in the front window, closing the curtains. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Reynolds, this is building security for Reynolds Global Holdings. Mrs. Reynolds has requested that you cease driving past her residence. Any further incidents will be reported to the police as harassment. This is your only warning. Ethan stared at the message. She'd known he was here. Of course she had. She probably had security watching him, documenting his movements. Even in defeat, even in divorce, he was still playing by rules she'd written. He drove back to his hotel, understanding fully now. He'd never had power in this marriage. Not once. Not ever. He'd just been allowed to think he did. And the moment he'd tried to use that imaginary power to humiliate her, she'd revealed the truth. The quietest person in the room had owned everything all along. 3 weeks after the divorce papers were signed, Ethan's $900,000 settlement, after taxes and legal fees, sat in his bank account like a consolation prize. He'd moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. Nothing like the Upper East Side townhouse. The neighborhood was fine, the apartment was clean, but every time he looked out the window at the subway tracks, he was reminded of how far he'd fallen. His LinkedIn had been updated by Whitmore Capital's HR department, former managing director. His profile had lost 400 connections in 2 weeks. Recruiters who'd once courted him now left his messages unread. Being terminated for cause from a major firm was a career death sentence at his level. But worse than the professional isolation was the personal void. His friends, the ones from Whitmore, from his business school network, from the country club, had all quietly distanced themselves. Some sent polite, thinking of you texts. Most just vanished. No one wanted to be associated with the man who'd poured ink on his billionaire wife and lost everything. On a Tuesday afternoon, desperate and lonely, Ethan did something he'd sworn he wouldn't do. He called Ava. The phone rang 4 times. He expected voicemail. Instead, she answered. "Hello, Ethan." Her voice was neutral, professional, like she was answering a call from a stranger. "Ava, I didn't expect you to pick up. I almost didn't. What do you need?" What did he need? Everything. His old life back. His career back. His wife back. "I wanted to apologize," he said carefully. "Really apologize. Not through lawyers or emails. Just person to person. For everything." Silence on the other end. "Can we meet?" Ethan pressed. "Just for coffee. 30 minutes. Please." More silence. Then, Friday, 2 p.m., the cafe at Columbus Circle. "Don't be late." She hung up before he could thank her. Ethan arrived at the cafe 20 minutes early. He'd dressed carefully, his best suit, the one he'd worn to successful negotiations. He needed to look put together. Successful. Like someone worth respecting. Ava arrived exactly at 2 p.m., dressed in a slate gray suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She looked powerful. "Thank you for meeting me," Ethan said as she sat down. Ava ordered a black coffee, waited until the server left, then looked at him with those calm, unreadable eyes. "You have 30 minutes. Use them." Ethan had rehearsed this speech for 3 days. "I was wrong," he began. "About everything. I didn't value you. I didn't see you. I treated you like you were. Beneath you," Ava supplied. "Decorative. A liability. Your starter wife." Ethan flinched. "Yes. All of that. And I'm sorry. Truly sorry." "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "Why am I sorry?" "Yes. Why are you sorry? Because you hurt me? Or because you lost $165 million? I both." Ava's expression didn't change. "At least you're honest." She took a sip of her coffee, and Ethan noticed she wasn't wearing her wedding ring anymore. Of course she wasn't. But seeing her bare finger made the divorce feel final in a way the papers hadn't. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "Why didn't you tell me? About the company, the money, your position. I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing." Ava's voice was quiet. "My mother taught me that lesson," she said. "Show a man your power, and you'll never know if he loves you or what you can give him. Hide your power, and his true character will show itself." "So I was a test?" "No. You were my husband. The test was whether you'd value me anyway." She met his eyes. "You failed. I know I did. And if I could go back, you'd treat me better because you'd know I was worth $847 million, Ava interrupted. "Not because you loved me. Because you'd be afraid of losing money. That's not fair, isn't it?" She pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, then turned it toward him. It was a video. Ethan recognized the setting, their townhouse, the back patio. The date stamp showed March 2023, over a year ago. On screen, Ethan was on the phone, talking to someone. His voice carried clearly. "She's nice enough, but honestly, Marcus, she's dead weight. No ambition, no drive. I've outgrown her. The moment this promotion comes through, I'm done. I'll find someone who actually matches my level." Ethan watched himself on video, casually dismissing his wife to a colleague, and felt shame burn through him. "I have a dozen more like that," Ava said, putting her phone away. "Security cameras in the house. Audio recordings from your office that Whitmore Capital's IT department pulled during the ethics review. Emails. Text messages. A complete record of every time you reduced me to nothing. Why are you showing me this? Because you came here to apologize, and I want you to understand what you're apologizing for." She leaned forward slightly. "You're not sorry you hurt me. You're sorry you lost. There's a difference." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was right. If Ava had been the person he'd thought she was, a housewife with a modest trust fund, he would have divorced her without a second thought. He'd been planning to do exactly that. He was only sorry because she'd turned out to be powerful. "What do you want from me?" Ethan asked finally. "Punishment? Revenge? Nothing." Ava's answer was simple. "I don't want anything from you, Ethan. I wanted a marriage with someone who valued me for myself. I wanted a partner who saw me as an equal, regardless of money or status. I wanted love that wasn't conditional on what I could provide. I did love you. No, you loved the idea of me. The supportive wife. The woman who made you look good without overshadowing you. The convenient accessory. She stood, picking up her purse. The moment I stopped being convenient, you planned to discard me. Ava, please. Can't we try again? I'll be better. You'll what? Pretend to respect me now that you know I'm worth more than you? That's not respect, Ethan. That's fear. She placed a $20 bill on the table for her coffee. I hope you find happiness, she said, and her voice was sincere. I really do. But you won't find it by trying to reclaim something you never actually valued in the first place. I valued you. You valued what I could do for you. There's a difference. Ava walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. The ink wasn't the problem, Ethan. The ink was just the moment when everyone else saw what I'd been living with for years. Public humiliation of someone you'd already been humiliating privately for a long time. I never meant to. Yes, you did. You meant every word. Every dismissive comment. Every time you introduced me as not really the corporate type. Every time you reduced my existence to something embarrassing. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder. I poured everything into our marriage. My trust, my love, my support. I restructured my family's holdings to create opportunities for you. I sat through dinners where your colleagues pitted me. I stayed quiet while you climbed a ladder I'd built. And you repaid me by planning to divorce me the moment you thought you didn't need me anymore. I'm sorry, Ethan whispered. I know you are. But you're sorry you lost, not sorry you hurt me. And that's why we'll never try again. Ava left. Ethan sat alone in the cafe, his coffee cold, his 30 minutes expired, finally understanding. Some apologies were too late. Some damage was permanent. And some women, once they stopped loving you, would never look back. No matter how much you'd lost by letting them go. 6 months later, Ethan had found work as a consultant for a mid-sized investment firm in New Jersey. The pay was $180,000 annually, a fraction of his former salary, but better than unemployment. He'd sold his BMW and bought a used Toyota. He'd given up his country club membership. He'd learned to cook basic meals because eating out was now a luxury. His settlement money was dwindling. Rent, legal fees, the divorce, the cost of rebuilding a career from the ashes, it all added up faster than he'd anticipated. He was surviving. Barely. But Ava? Ava was thriving. On a Thursday morning, Ethan's phone buzzed with a news alert. Reynolds Global Holdings announces major expansion. $8.2 billion acquisition of European tech infrastructure. He clicked the article against his better judgment. There was a photo of Ava at a press conference, standing behind a podium with the Reynolds Global Holdings logo. She wore a navy suit, her hair pulled back elegantly. Behind her stood Thomas Whitmore and the board. But Ava was at the center. The CEO, the owner, the power. The article detailed her company's acquisition strategy, her vision for expansion, her leadership philosophy. Analysts praised her strategic brilliance and steady hand. One quote stood out. Ms. Reynolds has been the driving force behind Reynolds Global Holdings for over a decade, though she's preferred to operate behind the scenes. Her decision to step into a more public leadership role marks a new era for the company and positions her as one of the most influential business leaders of her generation. Ethan stared at the photo. This was the woman he'd called decorative, the woman he'd dismissed as having no ambition. She'd been running a multi-billion-dollar empire while he'd thought she was just managing a trust fund. And now the world knew it too. That evening, Ethan met his father for dinner at a diner in New Jersey, the kind of place they would have never considered before. I saw the article, his father said carefully. About Ava. Everyone did. It's everywhere. She looks good. Successful. Ethan didn't respond. His father sighed. You know, your mother and I divorced when you were young. I remarried twice after that. Both times to women I thought were appropriate. Successful. Ambitious. The kind of women who looked good on my arm. Why are you telling me this? Because both those marriages failed. And you know why? Because I chose women who enhanced my image instead of women who made me better. His father stirred his coffee. Your mother was a teacher. Made $45,000 a year. I left her because I thought I deserved more. Someone who matched my success. And I spent 20 years looking for more and never found it. Because I'd already had it. I just didn't value it. He looked at Ethan directly. You made the same mistake I did. You had a woman of substance, and you couldn't see it because her power was quiet. She lied to me about who she was. She tested you. And you failed. His father's voice was firm. Son, I love you. But you need to accept responsibility for this. You didn't lose Ava because she tricked you. You lost her because you showed her exactly who you were, and she decided she deserved better. 2 months later, Ethan saw another headline. Ava Reynolds named to Time's 100 Most Influential People list. The accompanying profile was devastating. For years, Ava Reynolds operated in the shadows, building a corporate empire while maintaining complete anonymity. But after a very public divorce from a husband who never knew she owned the company he worked for, Reynolds has stepped into the spotlight, not for revenge, but for purpose. I learned from my mother that power is safest when hidden, Reynolds tells Time. But I've realized that as a black woman in business, my visibility matters. Not for ego, but for the young women who need to see themselves reflected in positions of power. Reynolds has pledged $50 million to create mentorship programs for women and people of color in business. She's restructured Reynolds Global Holdings board to be majority women and people of color. And she's using her platform to advocate for equitable ownership structures in corporate America. I spent years being invisible because I thought that's how I survived, she says. But survival isn't enough anymore. I want to build something that outlasts me. Something that changes who gets to own power in this country. When asked about her ex-husband, whose ink-pouring incident became a viral symbol of corporate misogyny, Reynolds is gracious but firm. I hope he's learned from the experience. But more importantly, I hope other women see what's possible when they refuse to accept being underestimated. Ethan read the article 3 times. She'd taken the worst moment of their relationship and turned it into a platform for change. She'd used his public humiliation of her to launch a national conversation about how women, especially black women, are treated in corporate spaces. She'd won. Completely. Absolutely. And she'd done it without ever speaking his name. On a Saturday morning, Ethan was walking through Manhattan when he saw it. A massive billboard in Times Square. Ava's face, 40 feet tall. Below it, text. Reynolds Global Holdings. Building the future, owning our power. He stood on the crowded sidewalk, staring up at the woman he'd underestimated, and felt the full weight of what he'd lost. Not just the money, not just the career, not just the marriage. He'd lost the chance to be part of something meaningful. He'd lost a partner who could have made him better. He'd lost a woman who'd loved him when she had every reason not to. And he'd lost it all because he'd valued her so little that he'd poured ink on her dress in front of the world. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Reynolds, this is Margaret Chun. Mrs. Reynolds wanted you to know that she's purchased the townhouse next to yours in Queens. She's donating it to a housing program for women transitioning out of domestic violence shelters. The residents will be your new neighbors. She thought you should hear it from us first. Ethan stared at the message. Even in divorce, even in victory, Ava was still several moves ahead. She'd bought the property next to his, probably for cash, probably without blinking, and turned it into something good. And she'd made sure he knew about it. A reminder. A lesson. A final statement. While he'd been busy losing, she'd been busy building. While he'd been focused on tearing her down, she'd been focused on lifting others up. While he'd been pouring ink, she'd been owning everything, including the paper it stained. That night, alone in his Queens apartment, Ethan opened his laptop and typed her name into Google one last time. Thousands of results. Articles, interviews, profiles. Photos of Ava at charity events, at board meetings, at conferences where she was the keynote speaker. In every photo, she looked free, powerful, at peace. She'd moved on completely. And he was still here, in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, watching her succeed from a distance, finally understanding the full cost of his mistake. He'd married a woman who owned a $15 billion empire. He'd treated her like she was worthless. And now he was learning that some prices couldn't be calculated in dollars. Some losses were permanent. Some people, once they stopped loving you, would build empires you'd never be part of. And some ink stains lasted forever, not on dresses, but on reputations, careers, and the small, bitter understanding that you'd held greatness in your hands and thrown it away because you were too blind to see it. Ethan closed his laptop. Tomorrow, he'd wake up and go to his mid-level consulting job in New Jersey. Tomorrow, Ava would wake up and run a $15 billion empire. And every day after that, the distance between them would grow wider. Because he'd poured ink on her dress to remind her she was small. And she'd owned the paper, the building, the company, and the future, while he'd owned nothing but regret.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Subscribe, like, and click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.